Oh, there you go. My bad. Not a lot of people today, I see. Everyone's in party mood. We open chat. Seems like we might have a more controlled chat today. Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Canto. Right, very good. We'll keep it chill today. Nothing too fancy. We'll try to build a project, talk through it, and revision. Yeah, high level revision. I'm good. Any plans for New Year's? What are you guys doing in a class? It's almost 2024 here. मैं तो बूढ़ा हो गया हूँ, but you guys are still young. I'm assuming a lot of you are, so no plans. All right. I'm assuming you guys are not in like college वाले लोग are not in college, I'm assuming. So Ram Ram bhai. No chill party on 39. All right. Well, happy to have you here. All right. My plans, no plans. The last comment here. I did not have any plans up until an hour ago, but long story short is a friend had a very expensive New Year plan and someone in their family died. So I might just be taking their tickets for free. So that's the high level plan for me. That's what I mean. I wanted to stay home. Frankly, it's the worst time to go out. Why would someone go out on a public holiday? So I generally hate. It's too much traffic, too much people. People are crazy. It's expensive. So मन तो नहीं था, but I might go. Considering someone's already paid for it and no one's using that ticket. But yeah, we will see that. Today's class. Let me start recording here locally. We'll keep it chill. I don't want. I know a lot of people are off today, so I don't want to sprint ahead without them. So and someone suggested this yesterday, felt like a very nice thing. Whatever we've done until now is highly theoretical. Um, we've been writing code, I've been writing code, you've been copying code, you've been understanding. And repeated advice is build projects. So we'll try to build a simple project today, but we'll cover everything we have touched until now. That means we will try to create a backend server in Express, front end app in React, database as MongoDB, maybe even authentication. We will see that will be V2. But V1 would be creating a simple to-do application. Okay? Now, the people who feel this is very simple, just drop off. Nothing fancy other than that happening in today's class. Goal is to finish it in an hour, hour and a half, and then call it. Go very slow, and then basically build this how I would build this if a client came to me today and asked to build a to-do application. If someone wants to build a to-do application today, what frameworks would I use? I mean, I would use a lot of frameworks, but here we've not reached there yet. What could I do with the current knowledge that I have to help someone build a to-do application is the goal for today. Okay? We try to finish it in an hour. If you feel this is simple, please drop off. This will be a very slow, simple class. If you think, how many of you can already do this? पहले ये बताओ चलो उससे we'll have a better idea. Can you already build a to-do app on your own full stack end to end? Yes or no? Hmm. Beautiful. It's like 60-40. 60% cannot. So great. And sounds like a decent class to do then. 40% को वही है भाई. If you want to follow along, follow along. If not, feel free to chill. Lay back, relax. Movie लगा लो साथ में. And yeah, that's it. Let's get right into it. Let me write down the problem statement for you guys. Laptop निकाल लो. Keep your fingers ready for this one. You have to code. I will go slow. But please code along. A lot of times I will write a comment and then you have to finish it without using GPT. Try to code yourself. That's the best way you can learn. Okay. Let me share screen here. This Visual Studio Code. Okay, there we go. All right. This is the code from yesterday. Let me create a new folder. Would urge you to do the same. Create a new empty folder and open it up in VS Code. I'm going to call my New Year app. You can call yours whatever you want. Create this empty folder and open it up in VS Code. New Year app. Going to wait for 15 seconds. We'll go slow. Aram se. No rush today. Very simple, plain class. Please drop off if it feels easy. You can do better things on a new year. Trust me. Create resolutions. Relax, chill for the 40%. For the 60%, stay and finish this. If you can't yet build a to-do app on your own, this will be an insightful class. All right. 20 seconds have passed. I have an empty folder here. Usually, the way I would start this would be if someone came to me and asked for a to-do application, I would kick things off by creating a top level README file. README.md. Harkirat, what is the .md syntax here? It stands for Markdown. It is just one. You can think of it similar to HTML. It's a way to write pretty text by using some syntax. For example, in HTML, if you write something like this on your web page, it becomes bold. And similarly, in a .md file, if you start your sentence with 2 hashes, it's sort of heading. Hi there. You can actually copy this over and go to, there are a bunch of what are called Markdown renderers on the internet, and you can see how this would finally look like. So let me copy this and let me go to Markdown editor online, and it opens stackedit.io. So maybe open this on your side as well and try to write some code here on the left. Let me delete everything. Going to wait for you guys. So just go to stackedit.io and this will give you a text editor on the left and a preview area on the right. You can now write Markdown code, and Markdown is nothing but a new syntax to write pretty code. Why are we learning Markdown, Harkirat? Because in most GitHub projects, for example, let's say this one, you see this section right here. This is the readme.md file. The top level readme.md file of any project is what renders here as the preview. If you look at the readme.md file here in my hkirat/real-time app project, if I look at the raw code, it looks like this: hashtag real-time chat, a dash and then the first to do, and then dash and then the second to do. This syntax renders as what? Renders as this heading and then bullet points here. That's why it's a good idea to write a top level README in the Markdown syntax, because that's what GitHub previews your project in. And eventually when you send your client to a project, this is the first thing they'll see, because you'll send them your GitHub link. This is also the place where, all the setup process, how to set up the project locally are written. If I go to an open source project, for example, P5JS web editor, you will see there is a bunch of things here in their README file, right? Ours will be much simpler, but the first thing you should do if you're creating a project, okay? To do application. This project contains a simple to do application. It has the following features. A user can sign up. A user can sign in. User can create a to-do. User can see their existing to-dos. A user can mark a to-do as done. Okay. One thing let's do is let's not have any user logic in here. Let's remove all authentication logic to begin with. So basically anyone, not just a user, anyone can create a to-do. Anyone can see their existing to-dos, and anyone can mark a to-do as done. If you can do this, it's a great start. If we have time, we'll add authentication to it. If not, this is great. I have this syntax. This will preview like this whenever I push my project to GitHub. Feel free to write it down. Feel free to modify, the text however you want it. And once you're done with it, we'll copy it over to our README file. Let me give you guys 20 seconds to, does not matter whatever you write, like write a small description. Just a place where people will come and see what your project does. I can't believe so many people are here on a New Year's. I like it. This will eventually what your life will become for people who are young, for people who are old. Already know this is what your life becomes. Like uh, festivals like these sort of tend to lose their appeal because the crowd is so bad here. Anyways, आज मैं थोड़ा सा चिल ही रहूंगा वैसे, तो don't mind. Okay, copy the whole thing over, then paste it here. Now I have a top level README. We are done with the README. Now comes the real bit of creating the front end and the back end. Building the backend is the most difficult bit in any project. Not the most difficult bit, the first thing you should do. Whenever a client gives you a project, you have a project to build on your own. Generally, a good idea is to first build the backend and then build the front end. So first create a folder here, call it backend. And यहाँ पे we will try to create our Express application that will support all of these routes. All right. So inside backend, how many of you know what you're supposed to do now that you have a backend folder? Seems like I created a file. So let me create a folder here. New folder, backend. There we go. What is the first thing that you do when you initialize an empty backend folder? You have to, I think we haven't discussed this yet. We probably should. You have to initialize a node project, which basically means put a package.json file here. I don't think we've discussed this in too much detail until now. I think Laisha covered it in a video, but this file is very important. This is the file. Whenever you're creating a backend Node.js application, this is one file you definitely need to have there because this contains a lot of information on what all packages you are using, what all scripts you have, things like these. I'll come to what are scripts and what are packages. But this is the first thing you need to do whenever you're initializing a backend or a front-end application. So let me go to backend, and here you can run the command npm init -y. You can also just run npm init. If you run just npm init, it'll ask you a few questions. Okay, what is your package? For example, what do you want to name the package? I can name it to do -backend. You can do the same thing. So start with npm init. Make sure you are in the backend folder here in the terminal, and then run npm init. Once you do, start to write like whatever questions it asks. Let's try to respond to those questions. Sorry, just doing a mic check. All right, name to do backend, version. This has a very big significance. Eventually, when we get to deploying npm packages, you'll see. For now, just select a random version 1.0.0, which is default, is fine. Description, give it a description if you want. This is a simple to do application backend. Entry point, again, not really important at this moment. Index.js is fine. Test command, leave it empty. Git repository, leave it empty. Keywords, leave it empty. Author, if you want to write your name, you can. You don't have to. These are all not extremely important things and not needed for a really long time. All right, license, select this random one, and you will see it creates an empty package.json file. Oh, it asks, is it okay? Type yes. And then if I go to backend, you will see an empty package.json file. The name itself has .json, which means it's a JSON file. We've discussed JSON a few times. It's just like a JavaScript object, keys and values. It has a name, a version, a description. The main thing it was asking us does not matter what this is. A script section, which is interesting, author, and then license. Now, do one thing for me. Run npm install express. I'm going to wait for 10 seconds. When you run this command, you will notice there is a new thing added here called dependencies. This is the most important bit for this package.json for now. A place where all the external dependencies that you are using are listed. For example, if you don't have to run this command, but if I run this command, JSON Web Token, npm install JSON Web Token. You see this here as well. This is super important because, what happens when you run npm install something? A new folder gets created called node underscore modules, and this brings a lot of libraries from the internet to your machine. Express or even this JWT library isn't bundled with Node.js. FS is the library that we sometimes use. FS file system is part of Node.js, but these aren't. These very smart people have written and put on the internet. And whenever you feel like you need to use them in your project, for example, we need to use Express in our project, we need to bring it locally, which you do by running this command. And when you do that, in your node modules folder, you see a bunch of libraries added, not just Express. Why does that happen? Because if you look at Express here, Express itself has package.json. Express is also a library that someone has written. It has some JavaScript code in it, and it has its own set of packages that it uses because, they also don't want to rewrite everything. They want to create an HTTP server, but use other libraries for a lot of functionalities that other people have written already. So what do? They internally require a bunch of other modules, which also come here, which is why you see a very big node modules folder. There is a very famous meme on the internet, node underscore modules meme. This one. What does it say? Heaviest objects in the universe: sun, neutron, black hole, and node modules. Why is that? Because as you saw, I tried to bring one package into my machine, and so many packages came into my machine. That's the reason why it's considered that, node modules are very heavy. As you have more and more applications in your machine, I have 100,000, like 1,000 projects in my machine right now. All of them have these very heavy folders, and there are actually libraries that people have created to clean up your machine to remove these folders. You don't really need these folders always in your project. Only when you're running this project do you need Express, right? When I'm not running this project, I don't really need node modules. I can delete it. So that's a high level of what npm install does. Now I removed node modules, it went away. How do I bring it back is the question. I can either remember कि हाँ इसमें तो I had Express, and then another one JWT, and another one, let's say, body parser, or my package.json contains an exhaustive list of everything I added in the past, and that way I can just run npm install. And if you just run npm install without any extra thing, it will go to your package.json, look at all the files, all the dependencies that are present here, and install them one by one. That is why that is the significance of package.json. Okay, it contains an exhaustive list of all your dependencies, and whenever you want to share this project with a friend on GitHub, whenever you want to deploy this code on a machine, you do not share the node modules. The node modules are never shared with someone else. You only send them this much code with the package.json, and that person on their machine runs npm install and gets all the dependencies locally. Cool. That's a high level of npm install and package.json and how to use it. Now that we have all the dependencies locally, which is Express, let's start to write some code. Start with an index.js file and kick things off with the basic Express boilerplate code. So write basic Express boilerplate code with express.json middleware. We have discussed this many times, so I'm assuming this isn't too hard. I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes to do it yourself, and then I will do it. Okay? Try to do it yourself. Try to import Express, create the app variable, and create some simple routes that you think are necessary for an app like this. Try to code yourself. You can Google. Don't go to like an old class and try to look at it. Try to Google it. Try to Google if you are stuck. Don't chat GPT either. It'll just give you the answer. But write a basic boilerplate code in Express. 2 minutes. Let me start a counter. Stop. For everyone else, I will recap. Created an empty backend folder. Inside the backend folder, ran npm init, went through a few question answers, pressed enter, 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 and then finally this file was created, and then ran npm install express. So that node modules was created and this dependency was added here automatically. All right, how much time do we have? 1 more minute to go. Forty-five seconds, guys. Let me also start to write here. All right, we're at time. This is the code that I wrote. Feel free to catch up. Let me quickly share what this does. Initializes an empty Express app. Makes sure all the post endpoints will work. Will be able to parse the body if it's a JSON body. Creates a post endpoint for creating a to-do, a get endpoint for getting all the to-dos, and a put endpoint for marking a specific to-do as completed. All three of these should be enough to start things. If you have a non-authenticated app, this becomes more difficult if you have an authenticated app. For a non-authenticated app, simple, straightforward. Now that we have this, okay, I'm going to wait for maybe 20 seconds and also create a gist of this so you guys can just copy this over locally in case you want. So let me push this. You guys can go to this URL. That's C capital L capital R 56. And you'll find all of this code there. You can copy it over as well if you cannot write it as quickly. I'll proceed in like 10 more seconds. All right. What's the next step? What do you think? Ideally, the next step is Zod for validation. I have to fill these endpoints, but it is a good practice for me to validate that the user is sending me the right things. Let me write down the inputs that I would expect here. Here in the body, I would expect what? A title, which is a string, description, string, and that's it really. These are the two things I would expect for a user to send me. How do I validate this? I need to create the Zod types for this. So ideally, I would create a new file here and call it types.js. Okay. Have these three endpoints. Right now, do nothing. Create a types.js file. And here add all of your Zod inputs that you expect from the end user. Before that, what do we have to do? We have to install the Zod library, right? So npm install Zod will bring Zod locally. Const Zod equal to require Zod. And now I would urge you guys to write the, the types using Zod for all three endpoints. For the first one, it will be title string, description string, For the second one, there is no type. The user is just asking for all the to-dos. You just return it to them. And for the third one, the user needs to give the ID, which will be a string for the specific to-do that they want to mark as completed. This also they will give in the body. So try to write the Zod schema for this. We've done this a few times. Shouldn't take more than a minute. So we'll wait for 30 seconds for you guys to do it, and then I'll do it in the last 30 seconds. I've started the clock. All right. The first one would be const put, create to do equal to Zod dot object title Zod dot string description. That will be the first one. And what will be the second one? Update to do, and it'll just be ID. Hoping a few of you were able to do it. And for those who weren't, this will be the final Zod types that we have created. How do we export this from this file is another question. Until now, we would just put everything in a single file. But now I'm structuring it well in different files. There are various ways to export variables from a file. The one that we are using today is this module.exports syntax. It says export the create to do object and the update to do object. So this much, if you write, you've written the right Zod types in a very nice new brand new file. That way you have a structured project and not everything shoved in a single file. I'm going to copy this and create a gist for people who want to catch up. Let me do a quick poll here as well, just to make sure we're not too slow here. I think we're okay, but let me know. We can increase or decrease the pace. Great. So 15% is still fast. But this is fast, so फिर तो we will, you probably have to revise. So the current stats are 60% is good, 10% is slow, and 15% is fast. Whatever, 70% is good. So for the 15%, I would say I'll keep pushing this project. Let me push the whole project so you can bring it locally. Oh, oopsie daisy. Hello. हाँ भाई. Okay, okay. So let me paste this in comments as well for people who want to catch up. And let me push this to GitHub really quickly. Until then, until the time I push this to GitHub, import these types here, figure out what that syntax looks like, and try to add validations to this endpoint and this endpoint. Until then, let me post all of this on GitHub so people can just download the repository from there. ठीक है, add validation here and here. This endpoint doesn't need any validation. Okay. So I'm also pushing the code here to github.com/hkirath/todo app. So you can just download it from here incrementally, or if you understand Git, then you can just keep pulling it. You paste it in chat. And let me now add all the validation that I was talking about on my side. What did I say? What validation do we need to add? Number one, this rec.body const, you can call it whatever you want to say, but chalo const user body, whatever, create payload equal to rec.body, const parsed payload equal to create to do, which as you can see, it automatically imported it for me from /types. So that is how you import something that has been exported from types.ts. How was it exported? Like this. How was it imported? Like this. Curly braces, create to do equal to require /types. If this syntax feels slightly hard, you can also be like const types equal to this, and यहाँ पे you can do a types.create to do. This is slightly uglier syntax. Cleaner syntax is you do object destructuring here, which is something I discussed yesterday. This is how you can destructure objects. Slightly cleaner way to import. You have this create to do dot safe parse create payload equal to parsed payload. If not parsed payload dot success, then return rest.status 411.json message you sent the wrong inputs, and then return. Or if things are fine, then you can proceed here, put it in MongoDB. All right, that's the first one. I'm going to wait a minute here for you guys to do it yourself, or for people who've already done it, create the same for /completed as well. Figure out what's the thing you need to import, how do you need to parse it, and then actually reach the final thing. 50 more seconds. You start to write it as well. All right. This is how you would add validation. The second part is done. We have created an HTTP server. We've added the right set of validations. The last thing that is left is creating the MongoDB schema. If the inputs are correct, actually putting something in MongoDB, actually updating something in MongoDB, actually getting all the to-dos from MongoDB. That's the third thing we have to do. So let's do that next. Again, let's do everything in a fresh file. And let me push all of this to GitHub so you guys can copy locally in case you've not been able to reach here yet. I've pushed the latest code in. If you had originally cloned the repository, you will not be able to pull the code if you're using git pull. So don't use git pull, delete the old one and re-clone the project. I've made some changes. You won't be able to pull the code locally. Okay? Just delete the old folder if you had it and then re-clone. If you're writing it yourself, even better. If you're copy pasting from GitHub, then just copy paste it over to your local machine. All right. Last part. What have we done? From the top, initialized app.use express.json, initialize the 3 endpoints, and then created 2 Zod validation objects. Third thing is MongoDB stuff. So new file, call it db.js. And yahan pe we will try to create the schemas for our specific project, which is a to-do application. Before that, what do we have to do? npm install mongoose, because mongoose is the library that we're using to connect to our MongoDB database. All right. Now write the code for creating the schema. We've done it a few times. The schema looks something like this. The to-do collection has a title, string, description, string, and then completed Boolean. Try to create the mongoose schema for this. I'm going to do the same. Make sure you have your MongoDB URL handy. If not, then you can use mine. But if so many people use it together, this is on the free tier, it will begin to break. This is mine. Yeah. Yep. This is my URL. Ideally, don't use this URL. Create your own MongoDB server. I'm hoping some of you already have it. If not, feel free to reuse this as well. But this will just, we will all start hitting the same database. So our to-do application will grow very quickly. And also, I don't think on the free tier, so many people can post things together. That said, you don't have any yet, feel free to use it. It's fine. You'll see just some wonkiness in your application. Okay. Now comes the part of how do I create the schema. Const to-do schema equal to mongoose.schema. Ithana syntax. Title, string, description, string, and then completed Boolean. One more thing you have to do is mongoose.connect and then give it the URL. You would not do it like this in a professional project. You would put this in what's called a .env file. You would not commit this to GitHub, which is something I will do very soon, but something to keep in mind. Okay, this is not the right way to do it in a real application. We're just doing it to quickly start the app locally. To-do schema is done. And lastly, what is the last thing you have to do? The model equal to mongoose.model, the name of which is to-dos, then the schema for which is this to-do schema. That's all. Less than 5-6 lines of real code. Lastly, module.exports equal to to-do. You can write this. You can also write this. If the key and the value are the same, you can write this shorter syntax. All right. Backend is done. Almost. At least the database bit is done. I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes to catch up. Also going to push all of this code up. So you can just copy it from the GitHub repository. In the end, coding is this only. Only thing is, I have done this so many times. Okay, this is all muscle memory to me. This might be the first time you're doing it. So you have to look up the syntax. And if I did not know the syntax of this, I would go to Mongoose GitHub page or their documentation, read through how you can create a schema, and then copy paste code here and start to write it, or just use an AI, whatever. Either way, you just have to get an app off the ground. It is generally good if you code yourself in Rocket Docs, so that now, as you can see, a lot of this is muscle memory. So I can just write this again and again without looking at docs. One more minute and then we will proceed. Code has been pushed, so you can just download it from there, copy it over, whatever you want. Twenty more seconds. All right, guys. अब क्या बचा है? What is left? Actually, importing the schema here and doing the puts, doing the creates, doing the updates. For the first one, what do I have to do? To-dos, which I can import from /db, automatically got imported thanks to VS Code. To-do dot create, I think, and then यहाँ पे title, which will be create payload dot title. Description, that will be this thing right here. If you want, you can await this and add async here. This is probably the right way to do it. Make this an async function and await for the to-do to happen, and only then tell the user message to-do created. Can I not await here, Harkirat? This is difficult syntax for me. Yes, this will work, but this is not ideal. If this database call fails for some reason, you are still telling the user that to-do has been created. So ideally, you should wait for this to complete. There's a good chance, the database is down, in which case this will throw an exception. So the end user will not see to-do created. If this throws an exception, the user will see an exception. You can add a global catch to catch that, all the things we've discussed. But this is good. This is better. You should await for the thing to actually reach the database before you tell the user कि हाँ भाई to-do created. Can I not await it? Yes, 90% of the time this will work. Databases are not usually down. So you can sort of assume if you've called create, the database entry will be made. But there can be cases in which, this errors out and you don't want to tell the end user कि भैया हो गया, to do is done, when this will error out after 2 seconds, let's say. So maybe just wait for this to happen. And if you want to use this syntax, then you have to put an async here. You can only put the await syntax inside an async function. That's the first one. What is the second one? Can you guys write it yourself now? The get endpoint. You have to-dos. To-dos.find gives you everything inside a database, inside a collection. You write the code here. I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds. साथ में keep marinating it if this is the first time you're creating like a MERN-stack app. All right, 30 seconds done. How would you create the get endpoint? You can say const to-dos equal to to-do.find and then no conditions. You can add conditions if you want, like title should be something, description should be something, ID should be something. But right now we want all the to-dos to come back to the user, and hence you can just find them. Is this enough, Harkirat? Is this syntax right? Is there an error here? Yes, there is. If you log to-dos here, you will see this logs as a promise. Because, as I've said many times, to-dos.find needs to actually hit the database. I am currently in India. My MongoDB database might be in the US. this will take a long time. You have to await for the to-dos to actually come back to you. If you don't, what you're getting in this to-dos object is not the actual data. It's a promise that will eventually resolve with the data. So for this case, you definitely have to wait for the data to come back from the database to you, which means again, this needs to be an async function. And here you have to await before you actually find something from the database. Why is this an empty object? You don't even need to pass in an object. I think this will also just work. It basically means give me everything, no conditions. But if you wanted to, want a very specific to do that has a specific title, then you would put these conditions in here. Okay, my title should be go to gym or something like that. Okay. All right. I get back these to-dos. What do you have to do? Rest.json to-dos. Second endpoint is also done. Probably the easiest endpoint for today. 30 more seconds to catch up. Maybe 20 seconds. Yeah, too easy. And for the people who already were able to do this, do the third one. Update an endpoint and set completed to be true. Also, there is a bug here now that I think of it. Can you figure out what that bug is? All right. Let's start with the bug. When you're creating, you have to put the title, description, and completed as false. When someone creates a to-do, it is not yet completed, right? Whenever you're creating a to-do, you will mark it as completed eventually on your front end. And hence, put this in the database as well. And lastly, here, what do you have to do? You have to update a specific to-do and mark it as completed. How can you do that? Await. Again, make this an async function first. We're writing the async await syntax throughout our application. It's the perfect syntax to write generally, rather than using, the dot then syntax. So async and then to do dot update. First thing here is what are your conditions? In our case, what is the condition? Okay, bhaiya, the ID should be rec.body.id. And then what do I have to update? I have to mark completed as true. The update function takes two arguments. The first one is what are your conditions? What do you want to update? I want to update something which has underscore ID as this. Harkirat, why underscore ID? Because if you remember, inside Mongo database, any application, they're uniquely identified. Any entry in the table is uniquely identified by underscore ID, not by ID. This is what MongoDB creates automatically for you. So whenever I'm putting to-dos in my application, they are all getting assigned a auto-generated underscore ID along with title, description, and completed. There is an underscore ID that's automatically generated. And here I need to update based on that, right? The front-end pay user will send me a request. Okay, please update a to-do which has this ID. The database, I will be like, bro, whatever is this to-do which has underscore ID as this, mark it as completed. Default completed is false. This is what updates it to be true. I'm waiting it. And then lastly, rest.json message to do marked as completed. This is the simple bit. Your backend is done. The difficult bit is the front end now because we're writing it in React. But the easy bit is this much. Let's do a quick poll here. Also, this feel free to let me push this to GitHub first. And for the people who are writing, feel free to write again. But our application is done. There might be a bug here that I'm missing, but mostly the backend is done. How long did it take us? It took us around 50 odd minutes to do it. Definitely scope for improvement, and definitely not everything has been done right here. One very basic thing that I'll repeat again here is that this thing should not be, hard coded in your code base. This secret has now been pushed to GitHub, which means anyone on the world can see it. And that's a security vulnerability, right? This is my database that I'm paying for, and now anyone can open this, read this. This is openly available on GitHub where I've just pushed my code. So you shouldn't do this. There are better ways of doing it. We'll get to them eventually. All right, code has been pushed. Let me do a poll and then we will write the front end for this. It's 88%, which is good, not bad, but there's still scope for improvement. 12%. This is a pretty simple backend code. So stay to the end of the class and then we can do some doubt. Actually, let me just give a break here. So 10-minute break for nah, no break. Sorry, guys. It's New Year's. Let's complete this and then just end the class. Give everyone a break. Let's write the front end for it and then doubt session at the end for the 12%. But I think this is good. 90% is a good number. ठीक है जी. Initialize the first. Let's test this app out. So let me run node index.js. Node backend slash index.js. How is this running? Did I add app.listen at the end? Index.js. I did not. At the end of this file, I also need to add app.listen 3000. And now, if I go to localhost colon 3000, I see something cool. Let me push this to GitHub as well. That's the first thing I missed. There might be more bugs here, but hopefully not too many. All right. So now let me quickly test if this app works as expected. I'm going to test this using, what do you call it? Postman. You can as well if you want. Make sure everything is running locally correctly. And the way to do that, if you haven't yet created the front end, is by using Postman. Oh, oopsie daisy, was trying some funny things yesterday. Okay, let's start here. Localhost colon, let me create a post request to localhost colon 3000 slash to-dos. Let's start there. Let me get all the to-dos. And let me see if this route works as expected. And it does. It already has a few to-dos. Interesting. Seems like I need to clear a database here. Sorry, a table here. What table am I using? To-dos. Or some of you, I guess, are already testing this out. That's why I did not want to share the database credentials. Now you guys are also doing this locally, which is why, there are already entries here. That's fine. So as you can see, there are already 2 entries here. If you want to break the structure of this class, you can just go here and, make changes. The URL is free. Anyone can see, and that's, you can just, if I was you, basically, a notorious student, I would, change the schema here so that the class sort of disrupts, but thankfully you guys aren't doing that yet. All right. Let me replace this with a post to slash to-dos. Let me add a description and title. Harkirat's go to gym. And then maybe the same thing. Let me run it. Cannot post slash to-dos. It's a slash to-do. So let me do that. You send the wrong inputs. Description. All right, to-do created. Let me create a few more to-dos. If I go to MongoDB and refresh, I see Harkirat's go to gym. I also see Charan Preet. I see a bunch of to-dos that you guys are creating. Perfect. Get works, post works. Pretty sure put will work as well. So let's get to the last bit of actually writing the front end for it. यहाँ पे things will get a little difficult. पहले ही बता रहा हूँ because the last bit of yesterday's class felt a little overwhelming to people, and that is what we have to deal with today, which is basically having an array state variable. But ठीक है, shouldn't be too difficult. So let's create a React application. Make sure you are in the root folder. Don't create a React folder inside your backend folder. Create it right next to it. For that, make sure you're in the the new year app or whatever your folder is. You're in this folder, and then run npm create vite at the rate of latest. Give it some name. I'm going to call it frontend, so that I have 2 folders here, one called backend, one called frontend. React, JavaScript, and that should initialize an empty React project in the frontend folder. going to give you guys 4 minutes break. ले लो यार, चलो. Take a break. 4 minute break. Initialize this repository. Let me open chat until now. Any questions? Cannot get slash. And that's because you're hitting the slash endpoint. You have to hit the to-dos endpoint, and then you should see something. Can we mark completed as false in the schema by definition? Yeah, you can do that. You can just, whatever. Type Boolean default false. यही होता ना? Whatever the syntax is, yes, you can do that. Can you preview readme.md file in VS Code? You can preview. Sounds good. We can validate the inputs, but how can we make sure all the compulsory fields have value? You can do something like this. Okay, dot min one needs to have at least a length of 1 or something like that. Zod will give you one way to validate, like some way to validate. If Zod does not give it to you, you can just check it here. Okay, if not created payload dot title dot length, then return, so on and so forth. All right, 3 more minutes. Can you explain the completed method? I don't understand the syntax after ID. Okay, let's see. So I'm assuming this part you understand. This part you don't understand. This is actually a little complicated, right? Why are there 2 arguments here? What do you have to update? What do you ideally want to give? Okay, bhai, I want to you can also do this. Probably update by ID or something like that. Is this? Let's see. Let me give you a cleaner syntax if it works. To do dot up. No. I think there's a function called update by ID or something like that you can use. So now you can just pass in, rec dot body dot underscore ID here. And then the new thing that you have to update, completed true. You can do that. Or the way we did it was, okay, bhai, the update function expects 2 arguments. First argument, what do you want to update? Give me conditions. Okay, how should I match? Which to do should I mark as completed? And here we said the condition is ID should be this. And the second place, we said, what do you want to update for this specific to do, which has this ID? And we said we need to mark it as completed. So something like this. That is what this guy does. This guy is the thing that actually makes the database entry. And this just returns to the front end. You are done. Let's make the class longer, code class 12 and let the world know. भाई मेरे party plan का क्या? हम तो कर लेंगे. I mean, I could have done it. If I did not say yes to a friend, but now I have to leave at 10. We can go till 9, maybe 9:15, 9:30. तुम थोड़ा पहले बताते आइडिया तो हो जाता. अब थोड़ा मुश्किल होगा because I've said yes to someone. Watch is package dash lock. So package dash lock is an important file. As you can see in my package JSON, I said tilde 4.8.18.2. This means anything equal or above to this, which means 4.18.3 भी आ जाए, 4.18.4 भी आ जाए. As more and more express versions come, give me the latest one. This file actually locks the version. कि भैया ठीक है, whatever is written in package JSON is fine. This is the final thing that is running on Hakirat's machine. And if I push this to GitHub and you pull it, then whatever I have on my Hakirat's machine is what you will have on your machine. This is used for making sure that all the developers in the team, or wherever you're deploying this, everyone is on the same version. Okay, my WhatsApp is buzzing like anything. Am I missing something here? Oh. Okay. ठीक है, 8 बज गए. That's what package.lock is. Let's start with the front end, guys. Let's finish it up. Go to front end. First, run npm install so that we install all the dependencies in the front end folder. We have all the dependencies here. What are the dependencies for front end, Harkirat? Go to the package.json in the front end folder. And you will see, it has React as a dependency, React-DOM as a dependency, and a bunch of other files as a dependency. Sorry, like scripts or packages as dependencies. Harkirat, what is dependencies? What is dev dependencies? We'll get to it high level. These are the things that you need when your app is running. These are As you can see, the name says suggests dev dependencies, the things that you need while you are developing your app. Vite is present here because you only need Vite to bundle your application when you're on your machine locally. When you finally give it out in the real world, you don't need Vite. Whenever this is deployed on AWS, वहां पे तो it will be an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file, right? In production, you don't need this. You don't need these types because these types are part of TypeScript, not JavaScript. So high level, the difference between these two is this is what you will finally need when your app is running. All of this is, extra fluff. All right, guys. ये हो गया, ये हो गया. Package.json is done. npm install to bring all the dependencies here. And now source/app.jsx. All of the structure we discussed yesterday, so I'm not repeating. Remove everything from here. Make it an empty app. And then maybe clean the CSS files as well. So index.css, app.css, just remove everything from these two. App.jsx, empty div, put a hi there here. And run npm run dev. Going to wait for 30 seconds. Aram se kar lo. Create the empty project, clean the CSS files, and in app.jsx also, just have this hi there here, return, remove everything else. All right. Now try to go here and you will see a very nice front end that is created. It's pretty rudimentary right now, only has hi there. Now we need to add more things here. We need to add one section that's actually for creating a to-do, another section which actually renders all the to-dos. Let's start with the first easy one. Let's create a fresh component. Again, you can create it here or you can create it in a different file. Let's create it in a different file. Let's add a folder here, call it components. And all the front-end components that we will create, what are components, Kirat? We discussed yesterday, but you can think of them as, your own HTML elements that you are creating. They are not that, but you can think of them as that. And we are creating an HTML element for creating a to-do. So in components, add a new file, call it create todo.jsx. Notice capital C .jsx. Do not end it with .js. Do not start it with a small letter. Should start with a capital letter. Should end with .jsx. And यहाँ पे write some more syntax with me. Export function create to do, which needs to do the following things. It needs to return a div which has two inputs inside. Export function create to do. Here's what is export. Don't worry about it. You write just a function. Function create to do. Simple function. Only extra thing is get starts with a capital C rather than starting with a small c. And it returns a div. Let me put two inputs here. Input type equal to text. Placeholder equal to title. Type equal to text. Placeholder equal to description. And I have two very nice input boxes. Lastly, a button. Add a to do. Okay. Put some BRs as well. All right. I have created a function which returns some HTML. Is this actually HTML? No, this is XML. We discussed yesterday. But for all practical purposes, assume a function that returns HTML and simple HTML. Nothing dynamic, no input props, no state variable, nothing. Simple input box button. You have this function. The only thing is it's defined in a separate file. So you need to export it so that I can import it in app.jsx. The way to do that was one, what did we discuss? Module.exports. You can use this syntax. Or in the more modern syntax, you can just be like export function create to do, which does this thing. 10 more seconds before I proceed. Feel free to copy it, or not copy it, of course, write it. Maybe 20 seconds. Let me just push it. What is the command that I'm running? npm run dev. What have I done? Created a function that this file has exported. What am I going to do with this function? Import it in app.jsx. Create to do tab, and it's imported very nicely from /component/create to do. Rendering it here. All right. What have I done? Created an HTML element of my own, sort of, and then using that HTML element here. If I save this, if I go here, if I refresh, you see the title, description, add to do. I have the first part of my application done. This is the easy part. The difficult part is rendering the to-dos. The other thing that we haven't yet done is hitting the backend. We'll get to that very soon. Before we get there, let's write the logic that actually renders all the to-dos here from top to bottom. Harkira, this looks very ugly. How do I style this? Great question. You can do a bunch of things. One way to do it is this: input style equal to 2 curly braces, not 1. Why? Because the first one you need generally whenever you're assigning attributes in React. And the second one you need because this is an object where you can put all your styles. In our case, I'll write padding 10, margin 10, so that title is slightly cleaner. I'm going to copy the same for the second input. Slightly cleaner, bigger inputs. Still not great, but we can clean them up. We can bring them to the center, do a bunch of things, add a card. वो सब हो जाएगा. Let's do the rest of the things first. Create to do is rendered. Button को also, if you want, you can pad it up. Nice button. ठीक है. Even if you haven't padded it, it's fine. Styling is fine. You can ignore. What do we have to do? Render all the to-dos here. यहाँ पे we will need a little bit of state management. So let me write another component here. You can again write it here, or you can write it in a separate file. I'm going to write it in a separate file. Call it todos.jsx. And again here, what do you have to do? Export a function. So better write that syntax yourself. Export a function called todos from this file, which will have all of your to-dos eventually rendered, the component that will actually render all your to-dos. What do I mean when I say render? I mean actually put them on the DOM. Something like this. What does this need to do? Return a div which renders all the to-dos. What do I mean when I say render? Puts them on the screen. For example, something like this. H1, go to gym. H2, which is the description for this to-do. You need to go to the gym. And then lastly, a button that says mark as completed. You just need a bunch of these written one below the other. And you can say our to-do application is complete. Okay? Define the to-dos here. And how do you export them? Like this. So now, what is our application? Some HTML tag kind of a thing for creating a to-do. Some HTML tag kind of a thing for rendering the to-dos. This is the to-dos component for now. We will see how we make this better, how we connect this with the backend. But this much is clear. Can we proceed? इसके बाद तो it's just connecting it to the backend and maybe some state management also. Let me push this to GitHub as well. Oh, okay. 86%. Not bad. Not great either, but ठीक है, चलो, good start. Front end. So let me proceed and then doubts at the end. Okay. Now, the thing is, you will not have these as static, right? You will have them dynamically the number of to-dos will get updated. You will add to-dos, someone else will add to-dos. So for that, you need to take all the to-dos as an input. You can take them as an input in a props variable and do something like this: const to-dos equal to props.todos. Or the more modern syntax to do this is object destructuring. So you can be like to-dos. Give me all the to-dos. Whoever is rendering this, please pass me all the to-dos as an input, where to-dos will be an array that looks something like this. Title, description, so on and so forth. Okay? Seems like you guys understand it. The only difficult bit now is the thing that we discussed yesterday. How do you render an array here? Given that you have an array, how do you render all the elements of that array one by one? That is the difficult bit. Uske liye, introducing some new syntax, curly braces open, todos.map function, to do, return div slash div, and this. To do dot title. अब यहाँ पे सबके, I know it's getting a little hard. Let me finish this and then I will explain this better. But this is the part that I've written very quickly. And then, I get this can be a little hard to understand. Okay. This part, let's try to understand. How do you render an array, or how do you render? Let's say if there are 5 elements here, you need 5 to-dos rendered. If you have 2 elements here, you need 2 to-dos rendered, so on and so forth. The way to do that is you iterate over the array and you say, bhai, give me, what is one way of doing it? It is this, right? Div to-dos of 0 dot title, to-dos of 0 dot description, to-dos of 0 dot completed, and then do the same thing for to-dos of 1, and then do the same thing for to-dos of 2. You can either do this, or you can create a for loop that renders all of these one by one, which is exactly what we're doing here. Okay, bhai, iterate over all the to-dos, and every to-do map it to what? This specific div. One thing you will have to keep in mind 100% here is don't do this. Okay, return h1. You will see some big red error here. JS expressions must have one parent element. We will get deeper into what this means. But whenever you are creating, like returning even from this function, a div, or even from this function, a div, you need to have a single top level parent. Yahan se bhi I cannot return something like this. 2 divs I cannot have one below the other. I need one parent div, jiske andar you do whatever you want, have how many children you want. But this can only return a single div, cannot return 2 siblings side by side. And similarly, this guy as well. So this syntax, ab ye batao, this syntax, so I'm sure it's not clear to a decent bunch, but how many of you understand this syntax? Let me remove this as well, just this much. Oh, you do? Oh, well, seems like this is easy only. ठीक है भाई फिर. Then the what is left? Actually passing in the to-dos. So let's do that. To-dos equal to, let's start with an array first. Title something, description something, completed false. ठीक है. Let me render these one by one. अभी के लिए it's hard coded. Soon we will hit the backend. Refresh. And you see the first to-do has been rendered. If I add 2 to-dos here, you see 2 of them rendered, so on and so forth. Okay, this works. This is great. Question is, how do you hit the backend and put it in a state variable? That is the last thing that is left that we need to do. So for that, first thing you have to do is define a state variable at the top. Const to-dos set to do's equal to use state, empty array. And now comes the most difficult bit. We need to hit the backend, get back the current set of to-dos, and call set to-dos with the new set of the current set of to-dos. If we can do that, everything else is taken care of. Everything else we have done. कि हाँ भाई, written the logic to propagate to-dos down to this component which actually renders them. The thing that is left is actually updating the state, hitting the backend, getting back the to-dos, and actually putting them here. For this, you can try to write something here which is the wrong way of doing it. But let's start with the wrong way of doing it. What do you have to do? You have to hit the backend, right? You have to fetch localhost colon 3000 slash to-dos, and then whatever response you get back, res const JSON equal to await. Res.json, and then set to-dos JSON.todos. This is the incorrect way of doing it. This will still work, but there will be a bug in this approach. We will see what that bug is very soon. But let's try this. What have I done? I said, bhai, whenever this renders, right, send a fetch request to get the current set of to-dos. Once you get them, get the JSON and then set to-dos as JSON.todos. This is what the backend returns me, right? If I go to Postman, and if I did the get request to get all the to-dos, and if my backend is up, which it wasn't right now, you see a bunch of to-dos here. JSON.todos gives me all of the to-dos, right? Wow, so many people. And so similarly, JSON.todos gives me that array. I'm putting it here. Let me see if this works as expected or not. I mean, there's one thing we need to do before this starts at all, but this is how you would debug. Okay, haan, theek hai, what's happening? Inspect element, go to the network tab, refresh, and you will see it says course error. Have we seen this in the past? One class we saw this. Okay, and there was something called the course error. What this is, we can cover eventually. High level, we will probably require a dedicated video. High level, what it is okay, whenever you are on localhost colon 5173, you cannot hit SS silently localhost colon 3000 like we are right now. You cannot hit one URL from another front-end URL, one backend URL from a different front-end URL, unless your backend actually allows that front-end. Unless your backend says, कि हाँ भाई localhost colon 5173 can send me a silent request, your backend will reject them, which is what is happening right now. How do you fix this? Go to backend/index.js, go to the backend folder here, run npm install course. This will install this library called course, which basically lets you do what I just discussed. Okay, let's one hit front end hit your backend. And we'll cover this in more detail eventually. Require course at the top and run the command app.use course. What this will do is it will say, okay, this backend is slightly insecure now. Any front end can hit this backend, not necessarily just, localhost colon 3000. You can totally hit this from a mobile app. You can still totally hit this from Postman. But when you silently try to hit this from a front end that is not hosted on localhost colon 3000, you will see a course error. And to fix that course error, your backend has to say, haan bhai, I allow everyone. I do allow requests from any front end. If you want to restrict, I only want to allow it from, localhost colon 5173, let's say, you can add something like this here. 5173. This way your front end can only be accessed by localhost colon 5173, which is what we want, right? This specific front end URL and no other URL. Or you can just be like, allow it from anywhere. That's fine. Both of them are fine for now. We will in a detailed video, probably an offline video, discuss what course means. Node index.js starts the backend. And now if I refresh, the request is pending, most probably because all of you are hitting the same database. And then, the request is getting overwhelmed and there are too many entries. Yeah. but eventually it resolved. And as you can see, there are thousands of entries here. Hey guys, thanks for the idea, Kirat. Happy New Year. So the database is very big now, but it works as expected. Of course, there are too many entries here. People have spammed the database, but we have a to-do application almost. At least we're able to hit the backend and get things back. This part isn't done yet. Add a to-do still is not able to put things in the backend. That is the next thing we need to do. This is very slow because the database has been filled. Let me actually clear the database. So these requests tend to do. All right, dropped. Oh, well, never mind. Seems like I cannot drop it. ठीक है भाई. All right, we have everything, but one thing, which is actually putting things into the database from here. This part should be almost simple. This part, which you might feel is so simple, is actually not very simple. Let's see how you do this. Go to your component called create to-dos. And what do we need to do here? Here we need to send a fetch request. So on, oh, well, sorry, one more thing. I said this is the wrong way to do it. Chalo, we will get to eventually why this is the wrong way to do it. But I can give you a hint. The hint is, if you go to the network tab, you will see if the backend wasn't so overwhelmed. Let me actually change the backend a bit here so that it doesn't keep hitting the database. And let me show you what's the problem in this current approach. What have I done? I've said, okay, bhai, let me not hit the database for some time locally and just return an empty array for now. Rerun the backend and let me refresh. You will see infinite requests going to /to-dos. Again, request is going out. And some of them are actually being rejected by Express as well, probably rate limited. But here, do you see so many requests going out? This is a bug. Why is this bug? How do you fix this bug? We will probably discuss in the next video. But right now, there is a very big problem in our application, which is that this is not the right way to send a request in an Express application. What is happening is this component renders, fetch request goes out. After, let's say, 10 seconds, the fetch request resolves. And then you call set to-dos. And what happens when you update the state? The function re-renders, which means control reaches here again and fetch gets called again. And then the second fetch will again set to-dos and thing will restart and it'll keep happening again and again, which is why you're seeing an infinite sort of loop of app getting called again and again, which is why this is the wrong way to get the data from the front end. Sorry, from the back end. Harkirat, what's the right way? I can give a hint here so that you're prepared before the next class. It's the use effect hook. Harkirat, what is use effect? And what is a hook? Use state was one hook. Use effect is another hook. Specifically in this case, this hook will let you get away from this problem. But how you do that is something you will discuss in probably an offline video or next week. But here, chalo. Assuming this did work as expected, how do you do the other thing? I said wahan pe bhi there will be challenges. If I go to the create to do this thing here, what do I have to do? Okay, bhaiya, on click. I need to do what? Oh, machine is stuck, guys. Sorry, give me 1 second. Oh, I'm back almost. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now? Hello, mic testing. All right. Can we pass props from child to parent? So passing, good question. Short answer is there is a way to do it. It's a very ugly way. I can show you how. You can pass in a function to this component and then call that function with whatever props you want to pass up. But this is anti-practice. Usually you shouldn't do it. You should never pass props from a child to a parent. Props should always go from parent to child. If you do need a use case like this, you hold that state up in the parent. You don't hold it here, but we'll get there. We have on click. What do you have to do? Fetch to http://localhost 3000/to-dos, right? You have to send a fetch request here. And then whenever you get back the data, const JSON equal to await rest.json. You have to do a whatever. That's it, I guess. You don't have to do anything. You can show an alert. To do added, right? This is what you have to do. Of course, you have to change the method to be post. And what else do you have to do? you have to send in a body which has the title and the description, right? This is the final fetch request you need to send anytime the button is clicked. The body will have the title and the description. Question is, how do you get the title and the description? Harkirat, we have done this in the past. You give this an ID, uh, description, give this an ID, title, and then you can do document dot get element by ID dot inner HTML. And that is how I can get this, the inner body of this thing here and send it. I say, yes, that is one way of doing it. But is that a great way? The whole point of React was to get away from these document dot get element by IDs, right? If you put an ID here and then do a document dot get element by ID, title dot inner HTML, it'll work. I'm not saying it'll not work. It's not the cleanest syntax to keep in mind. So what is the right way of doing it, Harkirat? There are two ways. There is the slightly unoptimal, but widely used way. And then there is the optimal way of doing this using something called React query, which we can get to eventually. But the slightly unoptimal way, which is also very widely used, is okay, you create local state variables here. In this component, you create a local state variable, call it title. And the same thing for description. Now that you have the title and the description as two state variables, just use this title state variable to send out data here, and just use the description state variable to send out the description here. What is the problem? Harkirat, ye to you have initialized as empty and you've never called set title and set description. That means these will always go out as empty. That is correct. So how do you fix this, Harkirat? What do you want populated here in the title? Anytime someone puts something in this input, it should reach here, right? In this title variable. So for that, this is one way of doing this. Again, as I said, this is a slightly unoptimal way of doing this because this causes a lot of re-renders. Anytime you call set title, it will re-render this component again, which is not great. In the other approach, when we were using document.getElementById, by ID, there were no re-renders. And generally, the rule of thumb in React is minimize the amount of re-renders. So the unoptimal way of doing it is, okay, you say, by anytime the first input changes, you get back, this is like one of those callback functions that gets called anytime the input changes, which means anytime I put something in the input box, whatever that input box is, the sign in input box. Anytime I put something here, the on change function triggers, and I can get the current value. I repeat, I can get the current value by doing this const value equal to e.target.value. Let me show you this slightly more practically. This is the first input box. If I type some things here, how do I get this value currently? I can do a document.getElementById by ID. Or if you remember, we discussed query selectors a bit. I can do a document.query selector input dot value. What is query selector, Kirat? Assume document.getElementById by ID. That will do the same thing. I can get this specific DOM element. Dot value will give me the actual value inside. Similarly, anytime I change something here, you will notice the e.target. If I log this, the event.target actually is that specific DOM element. So if I refresh, put something here, you will see what gets logged, the input DOM element. And I just showed you how input DOM element dot value gives you the inner value. So I can just do the same thing here. I have the currently stored thing here in e.target.value. I can call set title e.target.value. And similarly, for the second one, I can say anytime the second input changes, set description e.target.value. If I refresh now, most probably these two are populated correctly, which means now if I send a fetch request, this request currently fails because my backend is down, but is not sending the right things. What am I missing? Sorry, one more thing I need to add probably. Title, description, description. Let me start the backend. This is the right way of sending it, unfortunately. This is again slightly easier if you're using the Axios library, which I've talked about a few times. But if you are not using this library, you're using fetch. The way to send body in a post request is you actually have to stringify the body, and you actually also have to send this header, and only then will it work, else your backend will not be able to identify it as JSON. So this is the final fetch request you have to send. Look at this for 20 seconds. This is the important bit here. And the second important bit is here. Okay, anytime an input changes, you get the current value inside that input and do a set description or a set title so that the global state variable changes. And then whenever you're sending the request, you're sending the global state title and description. Look at it for a good 15-20 seconds. And then happy to answer doubts. Iske baad, matlab, this is more or less how you would build a to-do application. This will work almost. The only problem now is the infinite re-renders that you see, which is a big problem, which, as I said, you can fix with the use effect hook. What that is, we will discuss next week. But this is a decent-ish to-do application, both the front end and the back end. Good question at this point are, Harkirat, how do I deploy this on the internet? Great question. There are a few ways. There are a few free ways, few more paid ways. Free way for the front end is to use Vercel, Vercel, or Netlify. For the backend, the free way. Is there a free way to deploy Express backends? I'm sure there is. I'm sure chat mein koi na koi bata dega. Let's see. Is there a free way to deploy backends like a simple backend Express application? Render, the Render network. Or sorry, not the Render network. Render is one of those cloud providers that lets you deploy a simple backend, Express backend for free. Seeing black screen on localhost 5173, I removed everything and added component, but they're not visible. You probably have an exception somewhere, Akash, or you have not removed CSS files, which is why you see the black background, which is present in either app.css or index.css. Cool. Let me quickly recap, guys, and then I'm happy to free a few people, take more doubts. What did we do today? Let's first see if this works as expected or not. Most probably it does. Yet sending the right description and title to the backend. Localhost :3000/todos. I think it's I need to send the request to /todo, which is why there's a 404. Let me send the request to /todo. And as you can see, it says todo added, which means my request is going out as expected. Oh no, it says you sent the wrong inputs. Description title. What is the issue here? Description title, headers, content, dash type. I think it needs to be this. Let's try that. There we go. To do created. So this is the final thing you need to send. Harkirat, why isn't it as simple as body, title, description, and then method post? Why do you need this? Why do you need to stringify the body? So the body stringifying is how fetch works. And this you need because fetch does not automatically tell your backend, okay, bhai, this is JSON data. The app.use JSON express.json that we do, it checks the header. Actually, if you look at its code, okay, bhai, is the input JSON? And if it is JSON, it actually parses it, else it ignores it. So you have to explicitly send it. Again, if you use Axios, the library, you'll see the syntax is much easier to send a request. But this is the final thing. Let me push it. Let me recap, and then I'll take doubts. And people who are facing issues, I'm going to push this to GitHub. But again, you're probably, if you are facing issues, look at the console here. You'll see some error. Try to look at the error. Try to figure out what's wrong. Complete almost. What is the biggest thing that's missing here? The biggest thing that's missing here is, okay, you're infinitely sending requests. When you're sending this fetch request out, this you have to figure out. And then I will also cover this either in an offline video or otherwise. The recap for today is, what all did we learn? We first created a backend. Express app had Zod for validation, Mongoose for Mongo connection, and MongoDB as the database, GitHub as the place to push code. It also had a top level README file. This is all that we created in the backend. And in the front end, we created two components: create to do and update to do. The first one lets you create a to do somewhere. Second one lets you mark it as, oh, we haven't done this endpoint, have we? No. Second one lets you render to dos. My bad. We haven't yet, actually done the. Here we should have another on click. The mark as completed. Kahan hai? To dos. This button should have an on click. That should actually mark the div as completed. You can figure that one out. I'm assuming, hoping it's easy. These are the things that we've done right now. What are the things that are wrong in the front end right now? Infinite requests to get to dos and not yet implemented update to dos. Okay, that's what we currently at. Where we're currently at. यहाँ से, I mean, this is not enough, frankly. This is a very basic application. Maybe we have skipped a few things, but high level, great start if you can build this much. Now I'm opening the chat for doubts. First doubts and then Happy New Year, whatever greetings. So 10 minute, 12 minute, let's do doubts. Any questions? A lot of questions. How to get the connection string from MongoDB Compass? I can't find it according to your process on Windows 11. Could you please show? Yeah. So the way to do that is mongodb.com. It will not give you the connection string exactly. It will give you something else, and you need to have your username and password handy. So let me quickly log in here and show you what you want. So I'll take another questions. Can you explain the Zod structure, how to use it? Go back to the Zod like class. We've discussed this in detail, how Zod works under the hood. We also have an offline video where we cover Zod. And lastly, can you please do small doubt session when building the project? When you're stuck in the between, why you're drinking Red Bull? It's not healthy. So Red Bull is not healthy, I know. And doubt session का ये है यार कि class का structure will break. बस ये है कि बीच में if I start taking doubts, that's why I try to finish everything in 1.5 hours and then doubts at the end. So for you, sir, you will see a connect button here. As you can see, it has already been paused. But if I had this running, connect button, you will see a string there. It will show you. Let me resume this. It will show you a very long string. You need to first create users. So go to database access and create users here. For example, I have a Kira user here, which I can reset the password for. Click on edit password and reset it. Then you have Kira as the user. You have the new password that you've just created. Then replace that username and password here. Whenever in whatever string that MongoDB gives you, that gives you your final connection URL. Okay? Please get more offline videos on React along with how to push into the MongoDB database. Sure. React with I will. Don't understand what you mean when you say push into the database. Thank you for this. This is great. This is how you should send questions so that you can give as much context as you want. Error occurred above input. Input is a void element. Sir, most probably you're doing this. I'm assuming create to do. You are either doing this, you're doing return followed by div, or you're doing this. Something like this is my assumption. But if you could just, have a URL here with your code as well on GitHub, then I could have quickly looked at it and tell you. Input is a void element. Tag must neither have children. That's my guess. Baki, I can tell more after looking at your code. By offline video on bundler, I will. Let me start TypeScript ASAP. React के बाद ही करेंगे यार. I can create a few apps, but never written README MD on them. Question. I always know if there is a shortcut library to do. Please show the big picture on how companies do it. Please show us how to Dockerize this application. Probably a good place to start Docker. Dockerize this one. के लिए तो यार, it's pretty simple. You don't have to Dockerize the front end at all. There's no reason to Dockerize the front end here. Backend may, it's a 4-line Docker file that you probably have to create. Which will, have from node latest and then, pretty much nothing. Do npm install run cmd node index.js. I think this much is enough unless I'm missing some, or maybe workdir वगैरह. Oh no, sorry, you have to copy as well, right? Copy slash app workdir slash app. All right, something like this should be a decent Docker file. Then just build it and then should do it. For an app like this, it's very simple, right? Yeah, it's good to have a node, a Docker app, a Docker file for this, but is it really useful? It is, but like not as useful as, once you have 10 different services. That's where Docker really shines. Deploy करना है. Deploy करने को तो कर सकते हैं वैसे, but you will need an EC2 machine. Deployment is not too difficult. वैसे render network everyone's saying, which we will eventually cover as well, but I will not do that today. Um, Again, two things to keep in mind: render network for backend and React for front end. Sorry, Vercel for front end. Literally, shouldn't there be like 1,000 videos that will show you how to do them? And if you do it yourself, the learning you will get there will be much better than जब मैं तुम्हें करके दिखा दूंगा इतनी जल्दी. तो आकाश वो अपना कोड दिखा दो यार. Please explain code flow. Explain the code flow or when connecting backend to frontend. How does React talk to the backend? Okay. Code flow for the components app.jsx से start करते हैं. Control will reach here. It will send a fetch request. It will get back the to-dos and set it in state. Ideally, in the best world, this would happen. As I said, this keeps on re-rendering again and again, which is why this is the wrong way of doing a fetch. Assume there was no fetch here. ठीक है अभी के लिए. And to-dos, somehow got populated with the right to-dos from the backend. Then what is the code flow? You get the right to-dos here and you render two things: a create to-do component and a to-dos component. What does this guy do? Has two input boxes and a button. The input boxes update these state variables as you type in them. And when you click on the button, you send a backend request to actually put something in the backend. That's this guy right here. And to-dos, the other sort of component we have rendered here, what does it do? Iterates over all the to-dos and renders title, description, and the button. That's a high level of the backend. The front end. Backend, though, we have done so many times that it shouldn't feel overwhelming if I'm being honest. Assuming, okay, your question was connecting front end to backend is what's tough. Isko ignore karo. This only makes sense once we've understood use effect. Here, I'm hoping it's sort of clear. Maybe it's not clear, specifically this part, how these are getting populated. And if that's the case, feel free to give it an ID and send it to the backend by doing something like this: document.getElement by ID, title.value. For now, do something like this. Eventually, I can show you how you go to this or use React Query or something else. Unique keys are important for performance improvements when insert delete happening. In this case, React uses that is correct. We will discuss that soon. If call to set title in the create to do, does the parent re-render? No. If only a state variable changed here, which is not present in the parent, only create to do will re-render. The parent will not re-render. As we get to state management, we'll see how you optimize this further. But yes, to your question, if this changes or this changes, only create to do re-renders. If there were any child components here, they would re-render. Parent will not re-render. If we use async in the React function compound, does it wait for the resolve to happen? So yeah, it's you cannot do something like this basically. Now you can, मतलब recently कुछ आया है, something called server components in both React and Next that let you do this, something like this, very recently introduced. But for the longest time in the archive, अब देखो इसको भी मैं archaic कह रहा हूँ. Whatever was latest until a year ago is suddenly archaic because Next 14 has come, React server components have come, in which you can do something like this. But for now, up until a year ago, you could not. You could not have an async function call and await something like this. Now you can. If you look at our code base for the 100 apps.100xdevs.com website, you will notice I can show you a few components which do have async at the top. Let's see which one has it. Folder view. No, Discord. My courses. There you go. Can you see this is a component where I've done const purchase is equal to await get courses. So now you can do this like in the modern what's called a server component. But what we're discussing until now, no, you cannot. You cannot put like an await here. How can we write clean code patterns with MVC? How to organize code with me? Zoom meetings like you do on YouTube Frontex community on weekdays on a small project. There, what I am thinking is that all my code with me that I do on YouTube, I only तो उधर वो हो गया है कि everyone keeps spamming chat. So I might whatever internal chat app that we create, whenever I'm doing a code live with me, I will open the chat only to you guys. So you guys can ask me questions there. That's at a high level what I'm thinking. I'll also try to go slow, but they will be open on YouTube because they happen on the weekdays. It's good for them to be on YouTube, but only you guys will be able to answer questions is what I'm thinking currently. How to render to-dos on a screen when add to do button is clicked. When add to do button is clicked, Harkirat, how can I add this new to do on screen? Great question. You can pass set to dos here. So in create to dos, you can pass to dos as well as the set to dos function. And then yahan pe, you can do button on click equal to set to dos dot all to dos. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong one, right? This is the wrong one. Here also you'll have to do something, but in create to dos, pass the set to dos function. And here you can do, props.set to dos dot to dos. Also have to pass in the to dos here, comma, the new to do that you've created, title, description. So yeah, I say you can propagate it back up. How the okay, answer that. Explain the backend code one more time. Let's see. It's very similar to the backend code we've written again and again. Try to go to the MongoDB video from last week. That's 4.3. जहाँ पे I've covered Mongo from the very basics. If you've done that, it shouldn't be too difficult. वहाँ पे we built a more complex application with authentication. Here we've built a very simple thing. So high level, first endpoint to create a to-do, second endpoint to get all to-dos, third endpoint to mark a to-do as updated. Not going to go over it again. But last video, 4.3, try to go over it. If you understand that, you should 100% understand this. On change equal to this. भैया थोड़ी जल्दी वाइन शॉप बंद हो जाएगी. Okay. Yeah, this is basically okay. What do you want? You want that the state variable propagates whenever something is put here. Whenever something is put here, whenever this guy changes, let's say I put T here, it should reach here in this title variable so that whenever I am sending the fetch request, I can send the title along. For that, what have I done? Okay, bhai, anytime there is a change here, anytime someone types something, on change gets rendered. And यहाँ पे rather than doing a document.get element by ID title dot value, I do a e.target.value. E is basically the event call, the thing that you get in the callback, which has all the details for this event. You can log it and see it will give you, what position was the key pressed in, things like these. Specifically, the one that we're focused on is the current target, which means the current DOM value, dot value. So this dot value and this dot value are the same. Give me the actual value of the DOM element. And these are, the exact DOM. ठीक है, खुल जाओ तुम, my time हो गया. Please give me a New Year offer on your course. Give a New Year offer on your course. तुम तो ऑलरेडी हो ना कोर्स में, या तुम बाहर से आए हो? आज की जूम मीटिंग ओपन है, तुम्हें भी तुम बाहर से आए हो बिकॉज लेट हो गए थे हम इनवाइट्स में. बट दे तो दिया, मतलब यूट्यूब पे है भाई, अब उससे ज़्यादा कुछ नहीं. कैन यू गिव अ हाई लेवल आइडिया ऑफ यूज इफेक्ट? तो मैं हाई लेवल दे देता हूँ यार, पर मुझे उसको अच्छे से समझाना है क्योंकि तने पर था. उसको बहुत गंदे तरीके से समझाया था एक बार, और फिर उसको ट्विटर पर उन्होंने क्लोन वो कर दिया था, क्या कहते हैं ट्रोल कर दिया था. तो मैं इसलिए मेरे को थोड़ा ट्रॉमा है कि मैं ऐसा ना हो मैं आधा उधर समझाऊँ तो मेरे को ट्विटर पर ट्रोल कर दो. हाई लेवल, whenever there is something called life cycle events. तो पहले, before the functional components came into the picture, there was something called class based components, which basically means that, you would not export a function, you would actually export a class. And यहाँ पे you would get access to things like component on mount, which means the first time this component is rendered, control reaches here, and then component on unmount, things like these. These were called life cycle events. Okay, anytime this specific thing is rendered, the first time, then control will reach here. Whenever these functional components got introduced, So the way to do these life cycle events changed. What is a life cycle event? One of them is कि भाई the first time this thing renders, not कि भाई it will keep rendering again and again. As we keep calling set to dos, it will keep rendering again and again. But the first time this renders, control should reach here. How do I create a life cycle event like this? And the answer is using this live use effect hook. Okay, this specific hook basically says कि भाई anytime it has two inputs, a function and an array. Anytime anything in this array changes, control will reach here. And since it's an empty array right now, that basically means the first time this guy renders, control will reach here. Yahan pe you can send the fetch request. Now, does not matter how many more state updates happen, control will never reach here. If I put something else here, let's say to-dos, then anytime to-dos is updated, control will reach here. So basically, this dependency array has a significance, which is, anytime this state variable changes, control reaches here. But if you pass in an empty array here, it means this will never run again. It will just run the first time, which means it's similar to the class-based component ka component did mount function. And that's how you can restrict the fetch request to happen only once. Ideally, what you should do is you should put a set interval here so that you're polling the backend every, let's say, 10 seconds and getting the latest set of to-dos every 10 seconds. If someone else changed it from the mobile app, you should be able to pull them here. This is probably the right way to do it. Okay? That's a high level of how use effect works. Why not use the patch for completed route? You can use patch. If we want to create a LeetCode clone where we're running user submitted code, then will language choice matter for running the submitted code? Like Node.js single threaded or something like Rust Ruby. तो यार हाँ, मतलब देखो इसके दो, specifically to your question, whenever you are creating a platform like LeetCode or Codeforces, if people submit their code in Rust, they can actually use multiple cores of your machine. So the question is, do you want to allow them to do that? Do you want people who are in Rust to have a slightly advantage over people who are writing code in JavaScript? If the case is yes, then you let them use all cores. If not, then you run their machine, their code on a single core machine, which means even if it's a big core machine, you restrict their containerized app to a single core, or you just run code on a single core machine so that someone who is running Golang distributed code is not able to take advantage of someone who's written JavaScript code, which cannot use multiple cores. So that's a high level of how you would think of it. But whether or not your application actually supports, using multiple cores. I think Codeforces restricts that. I could be wrong, but I think Codeforces makes sure that even if you're writing it in Rust, you cannot use multiple cores while running a code. I could be wrong, but I think that is the case. Will there be a video on SQL? Yeah. There will be, and TypeScript will start. भाई धीरे पहले React कर लो. After React is done, then things are TypeScript is the last big hump that's present, and then a lot of libraries to explore and practice. Let's finish React first. How to decide which data should we get passed by Redux when data should get in parent component? There are Redux recoil state management. Generally, we'll look at a few examples and understand this. Where should you store this thing? Data, should you store it here? Should you store it in a child? How do you pass data from child to parent, parent to child? All things we'll discuss soon, very soon. Literally, most probably next week only. I was building two topics using HTML authentication, but when I sign in, I'm not sure how to set the authorization header through the server. Also retrieve it from the request header for other HTTP requests. So your setting it is something like this. Whenever you're sending the sign in request, you'll send a fetch request to /signin, and then yahan pe you'll send the username and password. And then whatever data you get back, you will set it in local storage. Local storage dots set item token, whatever the token you got back from the backend. And then any future request that you're sending, which you want to send the token, you will in your headers put an authorization header, which will be something like this: bearer space the local storage dot get item token. So that's how you would add authorization to your front end. All right. Are we going to study GraphQL? Probably not GraphQL. We can in the end, but it's not part of the official syllabus. Abhi tak to. Please please show how to write it using Axios. Axios ka first you will have to do in your React code, run npm install Axios. Once you've done that, do a axios.post this thing, comma, pass in the data, username, password. That's it. The syntax, as you can see, is much cleaner than this syntax. That's how you would send the post request using Axios. Why aren't we using proper folder structure like models MVC? Why are we not using express router? So यार इस class के लिए we did not. 3 endpoints में what router do you need? But if you want to look at a slightly better folder structure and express routers, feel free to go to the 4.3 video where we have done this slightly better. Don't we need to send completed false in slash to do? We probably do. I mean, do we? Let's see. If you look at the backend endpoint, it does not expect completed false. It just sets it here by default, right? It does not do a create payload dot completed. It just sets it by default to false. So you don't. More offline video on React 100%. Cyclic. What is cyclic? If you are going to use onChange, it means you will trigger every time. Why not use debouncing to avoid so many calls? You can do that 100%. You can do that. You can add debouncing here. Probably a good thing to do. Eventually, you'll see if you use React query, it just avoids all re-renders here. But this does not really matter on a website. It starts to matter a little bit in a mobile app. When you use a mobile app, create a mobile app using React Native is when you should not use this pattern. Website it's fine. Even if they're re-renders, it's like very minuscule. You won't see any perf dips. Can you make us do making routes different folder using them in index.js? So we have done that in 4.3. Check out the 4.3 video. In all the projects you do like this, I mean, using tools building for backend, clear work on things and making, I mean, using the tools and building. In real world projects, do you use the same process for connecting front end and back end? Not exactly. So what is a real world project? ये जो हमने 100x का cohort लिखा, right? If you look at this code, if we open source it or generally, this uses Next.js for both front end and back end. So now slowly depends on the stack you're using. If I was using this stack, then yes. Rather, the only other thing I would do is use Axios rather than using Fetch. But other than that, yes, this is exactly how I would do it. If possible, choose the .env and .ignore. .ignore में दिखा देता हूँ अभी के लिए. .env, let's do it in a separate video. .ignore is this. For backend, it's just node modules. For frontend, it's a bunch of things that React puts by default. How do you get connection string file? So that by please start TypeScript with React. करते हैं भाई मतलब एक बार React तो कर लें. Can we create more offline videos on React? Yes, we will. Alternative from declaring local state variables. I mean, state management is one. Okay, you have all your state in a separate place. Use something like Recoil. We'll get to it, or Redux. That's pretty much it. You need state. It's either a global state or it's component based state, which is something like this, or you use something like Redux or Recoil. Cool. Let's call it bhai log 9 o'clock ho gaye hain, and it's a new year ahead. I'm going to blame it on you guys, just for you guys, so that you can have a good happy new year. I will call it here, and not for me. मेरा तो कोई प्लान नहीं, मैं तो वेला ही हूँ, है ना? Okay, चलो जी. Have a great new year. We'll meet you guys next week. Offline videos on React coming, lots of them, and yeah, have a good day. We'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye. Happy New Year. Happy New Year 2024. Yay. For देंगे resolutions. Okay. Stop share. Yeah. Bye guys.